The discrepancy, so I've been doing the work for a really long time, and I come from an advocacy lens, and so the discrepancy that came out, I believe in September, October, is something that if you're steeped in the work, you knew it was a discrepancy, and you knew it was a large discrepancy. The Clery Act is just a law that requires universities to make sure that they are collecting data across campus, and they are a part of the Clery Act is to be able to make sure that they are alerting university students and the individuals who work here, but specifically to make sure that we are aware of any type of pending threats or ongoing threats. And so that's why we have those warnings that go out, those safety warnings that go out when someone is sexually assaulted or someone is exposing themselves across campus. Like, we all get the same alert, and that's part of the Clery Act. And so it's making sure that at a really fundamental level, I mean, there's a little bit of training in the Clery Act. It's not very much, but it's about kind of making sure that universities across the country are gathering their data in a uniformed way, so that we can be individuals can go back through and look over kind of what does this look like and what's happening across universities. And so it's trying to make sure that we have a better understanding of the crimes that are happening. Someone who's been doing this work for a really long time, I looked at those numbers and said, those numbers aren't reflective of what we know is happening in our community, right? But again, even if you look at UT Texas Tech's numbers, right? I think they had like 34 or 54 sexual assaults, right? In the same amount of years that we said that we had 7 sexual assaults, right? And even if you look at those numbers, 24 is not right, 54 is not right. The issue is, in terms of how many are actually happening in our community, the issue is, like, is there a reason for why we're not being honest about those numbers? And if we're actively trying to not give the right numbers, even though we have the information, that's a problem. And it's a problem for survivors, because individuals talk to each other. Students on this campus talk to each other. And if they're having negative experiences, and if they're not seeing their experiences reflected in those numbers, that resonates with if that's something that they felt that they were heard and believed and at least given access to resources in that moment. And so that's important in terms of how we move forward from this.
We became aware of the problems with the Clery report, the annual security report, last fall. We had an external review by the International Association of College Law Enforcement Administrators that uncovered this, brought it to our attention. The first step in solving the problem, we had an interim chief of police at that point, was to get a chief of police that had experience with this. We did that in February. We started working on it immediately. It was kind of the highest priority for the new chief of police. So we've been very diligent about addressing these issues all along.
I wasn't surprised that when they came back and said, oh, that was the wrong number. I realized that we see a lot of people who never go through the reporting process. We know nationally that 1 in 4 Texans will be a victim of sexual violence of some kind. That's huge, right? So obviously we're not seeing everybody either. We're partners with the university, and so we do believe that there was not an intent to be misleading. But I think when we've seen the numbers year to year, we know that that's not accurate. And I think we need to hear more from students. I think they have a valuable voice that we need to understand, where they're coming from. Maybe they have ideas that those empowered need to hear. So yeah, I mean, definitely transparency is important. And, I think there's a shift. Sometimes the transparency is difficult because, what do statistics like that tell parents, right? I think that's the biggest fear. If a parent goes onto your school website and they see this high rate of assault, then they're not going to want to send their kids to school there. Obviously, in the work that I do, I have the opposite experience. If I see it too low, I feel like you're not being honest. And that makes me more nervous than the school who's being honest, truthfully, because those are not things that we need to bury our head in the sand and pretend it away.
It takes a lot for a person to go through that process. It takes a lot, and I know that I wasn't the only one who felt that way. One, a lot of people don't even report their assaults. They don't report their sexual assaults because they're scared, they don't want to go through the process, and that person does that shit again. It pissed me off that me and other people who really worked hard, like, you have to work, you have to take time out of your schedule to go through this. That whole process was really painful. I think it was more painful than like what actually happened, because what actually happened took 5 minutes or something. But going into the office, saying something really vulnerable, having to like elaborate on it, having to tell multiple people, having to write about it, having to relive everything through the reporting process, was just like really painful, because that was something that I really wanted to forget. But the reporting process forces you to relive it multiple times with multiple people in multiple ways. And so I wrote about it because it was painful, and it was undocumented.
So what do I have to say to the university? Like I said in my thing, like, I fucking love this school, but you gotta get your shit together. This is not okay. This is so not okay. Like, if this doesn't matter, if they're fucking up on something like this, like, let's collect data. If they're fucking up on something small like this, what is something bigger that they're also messing up on? Maybe they're not. That's cool. Hopefully not. But if you can't do the small stuff, how the fuck are you gonna keep students safe? Like, ding dong, doesn't make sense. To me, Texas State's a teenager. There are a lot of things in all of the departments that are working out kinks, need to be modernized. Like, it's a teenager school to me. And I get that. No anger about that. But something serious, like collecting crime data, making that public to other students, to future students, that is fucked up.
Yeah, so obviously we weren't as focused on getting these numbers right as we should have been in the past. There's just no way around it. And so we have to redouble our efforts. And there's a number of things that we've already put into place to start this process of making sure that we never end up back in that place again. One of them is to make it an appropriately high priority for the institution. It can't be one person or one office or just the police department, or everyone has to understand how important it is that these numbers are all counted and reported accurately. So talking about it, just like we're doing here today, is part of that effort. We need to make sure everyone understands how important this is, and we're trying to do that. Bringing in people that have the appropriate experience and qualifications. I mentioned earlier that we've hired a new chief of police. Really, almost the entire command staff of the entire police department has been replaced since last fall. So you're seeing a lot of very experienced but new people to Texas State that are coming in. That's helping as well. We need to make sure that we never end up in a place where people who don't have the appropriate skills and experience are preparing these reports. To that end, we are establishing a new compliance office at the university, so we'll have a new director of institutional compliance and a dedicated Clery compliance specialist. This will be their full-time job. This has always been an additional duty for someone in the past on top of their full-time job. So a lot of those sorts of things that we've already started down the road towards, hopefully will ensure that we never end up back in this sort of a situation again.
When I came to Texas State, and when I thought about kind of like where are there gaps across this campus, one of the things for me was that we don't have a great unilateral way to have conversations around these issues, right? And if those conversations were being had, I wasn't aware of them, and that's possible, right? And so whichever one of those two answers is correct, at the end of the day, as someone who does training across this campus, the lack of relationship that exists kind of across this campus, to me is a gap that is only room for improvement of how we can kind of continue to work together to make sure that everyone is being trained and everyone is able to kind of ask questions that they need to be asking, and know how to be responding to survivors, be responding to respondents, right? The individuals who are being accused, because that's important as well in terms of what are the things that they're hearing and what is the information they're getting, and then that resource piece, right? Are they given access to all the resources they need? And is that across the board every time?
One thing we know for sure is that there's not one thing that makes people feel safe. There's not one way to make the campus safe. It takes all of us, it takes continuous effort, and it's going to take a lot of continued conversation.
The citywide shutdowns here in Austin have hit the comedy scene pretty hard. Iconic locations like Cold Town Theater and Cap City Comedy have had to close indefinitely, but that's not stopping the scene from bubbling back up. A stand-up set was held at Cherrywood Coffee House in East Austin this past Monday night. Fans were sequestered at tables, and mask requirements were in place for anyone not sitting down. In compliance with city mandates, capacity was held at 75%, which was good enough for fans to feel safe.
Seemed to be pretty well distanced, and they put some thought into it. It'd be interesting to see kind of how it looks going forward since this was their first night, but overall it was a pretty good experience.
While the comedy scene is being revitalized, there are key venues of the recent past that may never reopen in Austin.
Cap City was very unique. The ownership was unique and supportive of the local scene, and we have to be hopeful that whatever club opens in its place is going to be equally as supportive of local comics and not just focus on national touring comics.
The Cherrywood comedy sets will continue to be held weekly as long as the city doesn't change the rules. Venues will operate at a reduced capacity in compliance with coronavirus precautions. This should give the Austin comedy scene a chance to get back on its feet. For Bobcat Update, I'm Cameron Guernon. Having to rely on deliveries changed operations dramatically for some businesses, but they did what was necessary to remain open.
We went on to mobilize as quickly as possible, and within a week to 10 days we had converted from predominantly a dine-in experience to curbside takeout and delivery.
Third-party services such as Grubhub and Uber Eats have significant service fees that add to operational costs of small businesses. The extra charges are eating into the business's already slim profit margins and putting further strain on them.
They charge 30%. Now we're a sandwich shop. We don't make a lot of money off of each sandwich. And at 30% off the top, I mean, that's just cutting right into our bottom line.
States such as Washington and cities like Los Angeles and Las Vegas have passed regulations to oversee delivery services. For Bobcat Update, I'm Cameron Guernon.